Warning! This video may contain some sensitive mental health topics that some of you may want to avoid watching. This is a very long video that is meant to be watched in parts. Don't forget to take breaks from YouTube if appropriate. Welcome to my video series about autism and how it affects me. You are currently watching part 2. Now, if you haven't seen part 1 yet, make sure to watch that first. These parts are supposed to be watched in a chronological order, for them to make any sense. If this is the first video you clicked in my autism series, then you are missing important and crucial background context. In fact, this is actually one very long video I broke up into smaller parts to make it more watchable. So please do me a favor and start at the beginning and watch part 1 first if you haven't seen it. Now, I'm going to wonder how many people are there in the world that are going to watch a vlog that is this long, including much of the life story of a random nobody like me. If you are still watching and you watched all of this, big respect to you. Maybe you're also autistic for watching such a long video. No, just kidding. Or am I? Yeah. Here's the thing. Today, assuming you're watching each chapter a different day. Okay, stop, brain, concentrate. So what I'm now going to talk about is, it's been mentioned several times before. It's to some extent we've already talked about it, but not as much as I would have wanted to. We're going to talk about the preoccupation. Preoccupations, some people call them special interest. But yeah, let's think about a preoccupation. What comes to mind? Yeah, something like that maybe. You see, the thing with people with autism who have autistic spectrum disorder are often people that have a special interest, which is basically an interest in a certain subject or a topic. Usually it pertains to something inanimate, but not always. But typically it's things like trains or model trains, airplanes. There's it can be almost anything really, but It's common for it to be like something technical, like well, it can be certain toys or fixations, it can even be a computer game or a video game. Now for me the preoccupation is very interesting. It is moths. Moths, butterflies and insects in general. Now I get what some of you guys are saying. But Bart, I am not autistic and I like insects and nature. I mean, interest and even unusual interests are pretty normal, right? Even for people who don't have autism, right? The average normal or neurotypical person can also have peculiar or strong or very obscure interests. You don't have to be autistic to have such interests, but what sets the autistic person apart is the intensity of the interest. And you can say that our special interest, the one that autistic people have, the preoccupations, the intensity of them can sometimes almost reach obsessive levels. Obsession is really the way I would put it. Of course, I'm generalizing here because not every person with autism is the same. Pretty sure there's people with autism who have the diagnosis who may not have such special interest, but a significant amount of people with autism do. And the way we absorb ourselves in them and just, engage with it are on levels of intensity that you rarely see in somebody who doesn't have autism. And for me it's always been that way as well. Since I was very young, I've been really interested in insects. I wouldn't call it an interest, it's almost like a religion. Like, I have an insect religion at this point. I'm not religious, but that's how I would almost put it. It's like a central theme of my identity, a central theme of my life. But I think about it also most of the time, most of my waking days, from when I wake up and I go back to sleep. I think about moths. I do, and I love it. I don't think any neurotypical person would be able to keep that up, especially since birth. So, let me tell you about when I was really young. Even as a young child, even as a baby, I used to point toward small insects that I saw in my environment. And there's pictures of me in my childhood, although I haven't digitalized many of them. But if you look at some of my pictures from when I was young, it was quite clear that there was always this weird emotional connection between me and animals and nature. It's not something that's fake, that I fake for YouTube. The interest is there and it's very strong. Now, some people in the comments may be typing and giving comments to this and saying, well, Bart, that's fantastic. Well, that's awesome. You have a very cool interest that makes your life happy, I don't disagree, but you should think lightly before saying such things, because I'm going to be blunt. It can be something that gives you happiness, a hobby, something to do, a source of pleasure. But in many aspects it's almost also like an obsession that ruins your life. The thing that I have with moths, it's both a blessing and a curse. It's almost like a toxic relationship. I've been in it since I was very young, totally indulged. Well, what's actually funny is, as a child I always liked butterflies and moths. But in my teenage year I was really obsessed about mantids, like praying mantids. So not many people know this, but I kind of started out as a praying mantis nerd who was also into butterflies and moths. But the praying mantids have been my main interest for a long time. Until when I was 16 years old, my dad gave me a gift. It was the cocoons of an atlas moth. I've never seen such an insect before. I remember being 16 years old, so this is me as a teenager. I had these atlas moth cocoons, and when they hatched, I've never experienced a feeling like that before. It was like I was in love when I saw these moths. And I know, like, wow, I just completely forgot about other insects like praying mantis and started exclusively keeping moths instead. So that's around like the me and insects, and me being into insects has always existed. Me being into butterflies and moths has always existed. Although there was like a short period of time where it was like Lepidoptera, praying mantids, Lepidoptera again. So it's kind of shifted, but not entirely, because it still falls under the insect category. And that's something I pathologically think and talk about. But to such hyper-focus and tunnel vision, there is also some dark downsides, because not everybody likes moths. And to somebody who doesn't like them, or even finds them scary, I can be a very difficult person to keep up with, right? Like, in some way I am so selfish with my interests that I indulge in them, but I also let other people indulge in them by talking about it constantly, talking about it all the time, thinking about it all the time. That can get in the way of friendship, romantic relationships, and even work. Like, okay, I'm a rather intelligent person socially, so it's not like I am so unaware of myself, so unself-aware, that I just go around talking about moths every day. I shut my mouth, right? I shut my mouth about my interests when I'm around other people. I mask, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It's still occupying my mind, even if I pretend to be a little bit normal at a party. I pretend to be interested in the people at the party, not like they don't know I'm thinking about moths all the time, but I am. So they can't see the obsession, but it's real. And imagine having to live with me, right? At the moment I'm single, but imagine if I had a partner and they don't like moths. Now, that would be very unlikely, me having a partner that doesn't like moths. But just imagine having a girlfriend who doesn't like it, right? Imagine. Yeah, that would be very hard, huh? It's like, I don't know, I have 40 species of moths in my bedroom. I make moth videos, I write hundreds of pages about moths on my website. How is that going to work out, you know? Who's going to keep up with that? That kind of narrows it down to a very small amount of people who are even willing to consider, but also like friendship, like, I mean, hey, to make friends, you don't have to have the same interests, right? I think my best friend, the person I hang around with the most, I've known him since high school, and he's into films and music and not really into nature, like he has nothing with biology. He likes programming, technology, but I relate to him on some level because he is also very intense with his interests and passions, and we can talk about it. So the good news is you don't have to like moths to be my friend, but you do have to keep up with some of my compulsive thought patterns once in a while. And that's fine, I like talking to people about their interests. Like, if you are into true crime and you can talk passionately about it to me, and I can talk passionately about it to you, about my interest, then it's fine, then it will work out, right? But even that can be, you know, difficult to achieve, because not many people are willing to listen to you, I guess. Nor is everybody passionate about something they can share in return. So it's not like I can't make friends unless they like moths, but there's barriers, because, you know, I'm still a very indulgent person. And it still plays a major role in my life. Like, it does have to be acknowledged that it's out there. So, not by engaging in it and having to talk with me about moths, but like, it's annoying maybe. I think people around me feel like they're the number two, right? If you're somebody's friend, if you're somebody's partner, or even co-worker at a workplace, you want to be seen at the highest level of priority, or at least in the moment you're interacting with someone. And sometimes it's just like I'm not there, you know. I'm not fully there. A part of my soul is just not in the moment. It's still with the moths, and it's kind of hard to have concrete examples of this. But in this video I shared a lot of bad stuff. There was even a point where I was crying. Yeah, you guys remember that moment. But I'm going to be honest, the most thing makes me happy. I'm actually quite happy that I have it. Although I realize it makes me weird. It makes me a very, very, very weird guy. Everything about me is kind of unusual. I know that's something narcissists often say because they think that they are special. I'm unusual, I'm not like everybody else, you know? I don't want to sound like that guy. I don't want to sound like a person who is, praising himself by saying how visionary and unique and how much he stands out he is. But it's like, let's be honest. How many people like me do you know? Like, it's kind of out there, isn't it? So, I don't know. But my point is more like that there is a lot of bad stuff, but the moth thing, I consider it something good. Even though it makes me weird and unusual, I accept that. I think being weird and unusual is not always bad. It can be bad, especially to people who only want to fit in. Like, if you want to fit into social norms and conventions, I'm not going to be the kind of person you want to hang out with, because I break social norms and conventions. Try going to a business meeting with a guy who's obsessed with moths, right? I don't get along with those kind of people, but otherwise, apart from making it me a little bit weird and fruity and somebody who kind of stands out in a weird way, it does give me gives a weird meaning to life, you know? The word meaning, what's the meaning of life? It's often overused. But I don't know, it feels like autism is a curse in many ways, but in some ways to me it has been a blessing as well. Because it made me into who I am. Sorry, I'm trying to pick up the moth, but it doesn't want to. Dang. Maybe I should put it away. I thought it was funny to have a moth here, being this symbolic and stuff. But yeah, I feel like in some way, let's grab a drink. I feel like in some way, the weird thing that I have with moths, even though it makes me sacrifice friendships, it makes me sacrifice opportunities, it makes me not take certain opportunities because they don't have anything to do with moths. Even though I would benefit from maybe getting another job, another career, I don't want to. I want to do biology, nothing else. I want to work with moths, nothing else. I refuse to do anything else. And in some ways that holds me back, but it also keeps me really focused. I think a lot of people struggle to find meaning in life, you know? It's difficult, it's scary, you're here alone on this big planet. What am I supposed to do? Make children, marry, have a career, a car, a wife, 2 kids, a stable income. That's it for most people. You feel this existential dread, why am I here? Why am I conscious? What's the point of pleasure? What's the point of suffering? What's the point of happiness? What's the point of depression, The good, the bad, it's all there, but why? But I never had this existential dread, because for me the meaning of life is moths. The reason I'm alive is moths. That may sound insane, there's somebody watching this video right now thinking, what the fuck? Your reason to live is moths? Yeah, it is, and I love it. For a moment I opened my eyes when I was a baby, I had this in my mind, and I still have, and I'm almost 30 years old at this point. I'm not that old. But in 10 years, I'll be almost 40. How am I going to be in my 50s, my 60s? I can tell you, probably the same, thinking about moths. And in some way I think, even though I'm talking about myself, I think it's beautiful. I wouldn't trade it for anything else, Who else is blessed with such a weird passion that even though it's it's a passion that you're so passionate about that it's also a disability, that it's almost an obsessive compulsion, but you don't care because it's beautiful and it's in your mind. Okay, maybe I'll have less friends. Maybe people don't accept me. Maybe they think I'm weird or stupid or creepy. I don't care. I have this beautiful thing in my head and I wouldn't trade it for anything else. Wow, that's a bit of a rant, isn't it? Let me tell to you about some of my most precious childhood memories. When I was young, my parents used to take me on a vacation. We went to Italy, we went to France, we went to the Caribbean Isles. We're not rich, but we're from a middle class family, so we could afford like family vacations. My best childhood memories are finding the insects from there. I remember going to Italy, to the Garda Lake, the Lago di Garda. I saw a glowworm. It's like there was an explosion in my brain when I saw the glowworm. It's not something anyone else could understand, but I could. Or just exploring France and seeing European scorpions from the genus Euscorpius, or the European praying mantis, Mantis religiosa. Like, I'm pretty sure anybody who's interested in bugs, who sees those kind of things, they would be happy too if they found them, but not this level of happy, not this intensity, you know. And it's that intensity that makes me an intense person, I guess, but I wouldn't trade it for anything else. Some of my happiest memories involve insects, really. Some of my happiest memories are me raising species that I love. And when it works out, when the breeding doesn't go wrong, and I get the moths that I want, it's like, yeah, for that small moment in time, you're fulfilled. And let me tell you, how many people are fulfilled? How many celebrities, how many kings have killed themselves? How many Hollywood stars who had it all the money, all the fame, all the power, politicians. How many people struggle with depression or feeling that there's no meaning in life? With all due respect, it isn't me. I will never feel that way. I will always feel fulfilled by this silly little stupid thing called moths. And people are out there killing each other, killing themselves, just because they don't know what to do with their life. They think they have to fill it with hedonistic pleasure, money, power, you know. I just need moths. And I'm happy. If that isn't a blessing, I don't know what it is. It's a gift. It's probably also what made me successful on social media. I'm terrible at vlogging, actually. I'm not really that much of an entertainer. I use slow, long, convoluted language. I make too long videos. Nobody is going to watch this 5-hour video about autism. Okay, maybe a handful of people, but like, in general. On paper, I'm really not that talented of a YouTuber. But the reason it works out is because I'm doing something with an extreme intensity for what I love. And I think it's like the happiness. I don't think there's many people that could get a lot of subscribers with moths. Hey, I'm bragging, but it's true. I don't think many people could. Not because they know less than me, not because they know less about entomology or because they are worse at breeding the insect. It's because no one can compete with this level of passion. You can't. It's like, if you have a healthy brain, you're going to lose. No one can keep this up like I do. I've made like 1200 videos about moths in 7 years. Good luck trying the same thing, my friends. You can't. You can't, I'm sorry. There's very little people that can, because to me it's like a drug, right? But I didn't really want to share this just because I want to share you the fact that the preoccupation is kind of like a blessing and a curse. It makes me happy, but it also makes me weird. But also just to draw attention to the fact, to the people watching this, that yeah, autism goes together with preoccupations, with very strong and narrow interests sometimes that seem very repetitive, compulsive and obsessive in nature, almost neurotic in some way. But yeah, it's something you very commonly see in people with autism. Not always, okay. And for me, this is really one of the strongest things. It's like autism affects me in many ways, but the preoccupation thing, like my mind has just been destroyed with moths. That's all it wants. That's the crazy thing. And maybe some people can relate. So, do you know someone with a special interest with autism? Then write it in the comments, you know. It would be fun to hear. It's always nice to hear what other people have. If you're not autistic and you also have a special interest, I would also like to know. And now for part 2, because some people may be wondering, why? Why can people with autism spectrum syndrome be this so obsessed with a certain subject? Why? Where does that come from? I'm not a neurologist or a doctor, but let me explain to you. Your brain, it makes happy juice. Happy juice, we'll call it. When you hug someone, when you kiss someone, your brain releases happy juice. It makes you feel good. Now, the happy juice in reality are hormones. They are primarily dopamine and serotonin. You may have heard of them. For example, a lot of drugs, what they do is they contain substances that stimulate your dopamine or serotonin receptors, or they trick your brain into releasing those hormones. Basically, they force you to release the happy juice, or they simulate the happy juice in your brain, which makes you feel happy, you know, when you're high. This is not me promoting drugs, don't do them, it's very bad. But the feeling of happiness that your brain feels, the happy juice, the serotonin and the dopamine, it has a lot to do with that. Now let me talk to you about pleasure. And when I say pleasure, I mean happiness, right? When I say pleasure, most people think about sex. That's included too. Like when you have an orgasm, your brain also releases dopamine. Because like the pleasurable feeling when you orgasm, yeah, wow, what a thing to say on YouTube. But like the good feeling you have when you have an orgasm, that's dopamine, for example. But there's many other things like eating. If you're eating a hamburger, if you're eating food and like, oh, this food is delicious, your brain is releasing the happy juice. But it can also be other things, like when you complete a task, right? Like, well, you have to finish an exam, and you study for the test, and you are very bad at the subject, but it gives you a lot of anxiety. But then you get a test result and you get a really good grade. Like you get a 90 out of 100. You're like, damn, you know, I did my best and I succeeded. And I got a high grade for this difficult test I was studying for months. And I feel good. Happy juice, that's the serotonin and your dopamine working in your brain. Now how this exactly works, I'm not going to explain it in detail, sorry guys. I'm also not a neurologist, so I cannot explain this in very high detail, but this is the general outline. It's not that important, it's just important for you to know that the pleasure reward system in your brain actually plays a role in these behaviors and preoccupations. Now how? I will explain to you that later. But pleasure in your brain, it comes from hormones that you release, for example, when you have sex, when you eat, when you complete a difficult task, but also other things, like for example, taking care of yourself, taking like a warm shower, but also social. When you talk to someone, when you're social, when you hang out and you develop a connection with someone or a friendship, or you get a compliment, somebody comes up to you and say, wow, you really look good today, you look fantastic, you You feel happy. Yep, your brain releases the happy juice. So, and that's what motivates you to do all the things that you do in life. Basically, a lot of our behaviors in some way are reward-seeking behaviors, because it's the reward that reinforces our behavior, and it's our behavior that's actually motivated towards getting that reward. So it's like a self-regulating system that in some ways regulates our behaviors, because I'd argue that most of the things that we do are motivated by pleasure. Not directly, well, or actually directly. Even if you help somebody else who is in trouble and you may not get anything out of it in return, you'll still feel good about yourself. So maybe it was not a selfless action, because you still get the happy juice because you feel good. Like, oh, I helped someone who was in trouble. And that's actually one of the things that make your brain release the happy juice as well. The reward pathways. So there is strong evidence that these pathways and the way autistic people experience pleasure are different. And let me actually explain some of this. Now, how this precisely works and how this affects people with autism is actually not conclusive yet. Science doesn't really know this yet in great detail. But I did some research and I found some medical research papers, and I was hoping to share some of them with you and discuss some of the things that we see. Hope you guys are chilling, having a good time. Just listen to this, alright? This is not one of my moth videos, it's just food for thought. First is a publication, and I'm going to read for a second. It's called "Interest in High-Functioning Autism are more intense, interfering and idiosyncratic, but not more circumscribed than those in neurotypical development." And the abstract goes as follows. Now I'm going to leave a lot of details out because this is already a long video, but it goes: through circumscribed interests are pathognomonic with autism. Pathognomonic is a difficult word, but it basically means it is characteristic or typical for a certain disease or disorder. Through circumscribed interests are pathognomonic with autism. How these interests differ from those expressed during neurotypical development remains unknown. Using a novel measure, the interest scale, so they basically made a scale based on a questionnaire that scales a level and also the intensity of certain interest. And this study compares interest between 76 neurotypical individuals and 109 individuals with high-functioning autism spectrum disorder, matched group-wise on age, IQ and gender ratio. So, the outcome, I'm going to skim over a lot of this. I'll put a citation in the end if you really want to read the paper. So people on the autistic spectrum, individuals had significantly more intense and interfering interests than neurotypical individuals. Using only the intensity score, 77.5% of individuals were correctly classified in a discriminant function analysis. Now, discriminant function analysis sounds very fancy, but it's an analysis that tries to discriminate one target, in this case people with autism spectrum syndrome, from a data set that includes both people with and without autism. And basically with 77.5% accuracy, the analysis was able to figure out who actually was autistic and who wasn't. Now that's 77% is a pretty good score, although it means that about 1/4 of the people it assumed to be autistic perhaps weren't, but that's just based on one preliminary data set, based on a novel intensity score. So I imagine the process would need some refining and maybe some better quantification of the data, because I imagine Anyway, this is too much talking. Anyway, the truth is that the type and intensity, but not the number of interest, distinguish high-functioning children with autism spectrum syndrome from neurotypical children. What does all of this mean? It means that the intensity of the level of interest that people with autism have are simply much higher than those who are neurotypical, right? And this also relates to the reward that your brain gives when you indulge in your interest, right? Most people, when you make a beautiful painting, when you learn to code or program, it makes you feel good. It releases the happy juice, but for people with autism, maybe they release more or abnormal levels of happy juice. So what that means is that the moths and insects, as our special interest, actually give us an abnormal amount of pleasure. Yeah, it does. So when people look at me and see, wow, I love these moths, they make me so happy, they think I'm crazy. You're not. Here's the scientific evidence. I'm not crazy. The moths make me high in some way. It's like an addiction, isn't it? It's possible that the way we experience pleasure is altered as some of these pathways to be very atypical. And I have more proof of that, because science isn't finished yet, yeah. I collected some more data. Still watching? You're a champion. I can't believe some people watch all this. Let me see. Ah yes, here's another cool publication. I'm just going to take this straight from the publication. It's actually not the abstract, but the part where it describes the problem, and it has a nice collection of citations, so I took it. It's a publication called Diminished Social Reward Anticipation in Broad Autism Phenotype as Revealed by Event-Related Brain Potentials. Now, that's the name of the publication. If you don't know what it means, doesn't matter, because we're actually not going to discuss the entire publication itself. But I'm just going to take the outline that it gives before it actually does the research. So this is interesting. Given the hypothesized importance of social reward in the development of children with autism spectrum syndrome, a growing literature examines behavioral and neural facets of reward system function in this population. Behavioral studies have revealed attenuated responsiveness to social incentives, including verbal praise. Now, for those of you who don't have a fancy vocabulary, attenuated responsiveness to social incentives, including verbal praise, means an inhibited responsiveness, an inhibited response to social cues, rewards, and motivations. That's the best way I would put it. But also pictures of smiling faces and pictograms depicting social reciprocity. Now, reciprocity is basically when something is mutual. When I engage with you socially, I say, hey, how was your day at work? And you answer my question, we start a conversation. That's a form of social reciprocity. And for a lot of people, this releases the happy juice, right? The happy juice, we're gonna call it like that. But it turns out these responses are diminished, or at least atypical in the autistic brain, which means that there is evidence that people with autism not only receive more pleasure from their interest, but less pleasure from social activities. Yeah. And that's not what all of us always thought, right? But it's nice to have some science to back this stuff up. Science makes us feel understood. So these studies are consistent with social motivation theories in indicating that individuals with autism spectrum syndrome do not properly anticipate and appreciate the reward value of social stimuli. Interesting. So the word that I like here is reward value. And I'm gonna be very blunt, okay? Hugging someone feels good. Having an orgasm also feels good. And if I would ask most people, what feels better, hugging someone or having an orgasm? And this is like a really blunt example, but it's to drive the point across. Most people would say, well, an orgasm feels more pleasurable than getting a hug from someone. Why is that though? Why is that? And that comes down to the reward value. I'm sorry I just had to use something that explicit as an example, but you will understand the example, I think, right? So everything you do in life more or less has a reward value. For example, you have an itch, you scratch your back. Ah, that feels good. It feels good, but it's not going to like make your day, right? It's not going to feel like winning the lottery. If it's cold outside and I'm freezing and I put on a warm coat, that feels good. But imagine that putting on a warm coat when it's cold outdoors, it feels just as good as winning the lottery or having an orgasm. And people would say that you're crazy, right? That's because it's not proportional. So our brain releases a certain amount of happy juice that is proportional to the certain tasks and things that we do in life and how proportional they are to our survival. So when you eat, when you sleep, when you shower, when you talk with people, when you make friends, when you dress yourself, anything, when you achieve a goal, even when you're playing video games, watching a movie, your brain is all the time releasing the happy juices. And everything that you do and indulge in has a reward value. And it turns out that these reward values with people with autism are different and atypical. That actually says a lot about our behaviors, don't you think? It's starting to explain a lot of it. In my opinion, it does. Pleasure plays a central theme in our lives, in the ways that we behave and think and experience the world. Just look at people with depression who are in many ways inhibited in their ability to feel pleasure and how miserable they are, sometimes suffering under the condition. I mean, with all due respect for people with depression, it's terrible. And that's because just the inability to feel pleasure, it can ruin your life in some ways. It can also alter your behavior if the things that give you pleasure are different. So let's have more evidence. Convergent neurobiological evidence indicates that deficits in reward processing in autism spectrum syndrome are associated with abnormal patterns of brain activity in dopaminergic mesocorticolimbic circuitry comprising, among other regions, well, the ventral striatum, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex. Okay. How am I going to explain this in layman's terms? Because that right there, that became a little bit complicated, right? The mesocorticolimbic circuitry, what they're talking about, is basically a reward pathway in your brain. And how do I explain this easily? So this reward pathway, it plays a role in motivation, and in motivation and the desire for rewarding stimuli, right? And it facilitates the reinforcement and reward-related motor functioning. It may play a role in the subjective perception of pleasure. Yeah, it's a reward pathway in the brain that affects your subjective perception of pleasure and your motivation to get it. That's how I would put it. So, what this says is that this indicates that there is a deficit in the reward pathway that motivates you to do things that you desire and to experience and perceive the things that you desire, and your ability to perceive pleasure in the first place. That's food for thought. So in the autistic brain, the things that make us feel good, the things that we want to do because it makes us feel good, because it gives you the happy juice, are different. They have different values. We get a different amount of pleasure for different things than the typical person would. And that makes us pursue certain interests, certain passions, certain behaviors that would make no sense to someone else. Neither would make them happy, but it would make us happy. It does. And that's actually amazing evidence here. Are you keeping up? You are? That's fantastic. I love it. Cheers. I can talk about this stuff forever. I love science. I am not a neurologist, a doctor or a scientist. Just a disclaimer, this is not medical advice. I can be wrong. Take it with a grain of salt. Just a bored autistic guy with a camera. But this is interesting subject matter and important. Functional magnetic resonance imaging studies reveal reactivity of certain regions, particularly striatum, so that's just technical details about your brain, I'm not going to explain it, in typically developing individuals during the anticipation of positive social feedback, with activity correlating to social reward magnitude. Among individuals with autism spectrum syndrome, aberrant brain responses have been observed in the areas of the hypothalamus during the anticipation of monetary reward. Activity in reward regions correlates with social functioning, linking atypical reward system activity in autism spectrum syndrome to the social communicative difficulties that define the clinical phenotype. So, basically, what I did was like brain scanning. It's called functional magnetic resonance imaging. And what it does is this technology, it measures the blood flow in the brain, the way your blood flows in your brain. Now, some of you who know about the brain will know that blood flow correlates with neural activity. So if there's a lot of neural activity in one part of the brain, you expect to see a lot of blood flow there. So by correlating blood flow and neural activity, you can get a good idea of what is going on in the brain. You can get an idea of the neural activity based on the blood flow and basically get an idea of which parts of the brain are active under what circumstances, situations, or exposed to what stimuli. So what does this show is that when the brain scans basically show that there is an abnormal response in the brain or atypical response in the brain that correlates to social functioning. Wow. Okay. And also linking the social communicative difficulties that define a clinical phenotype. So that means, we talked about this in the presentation before, how people with autism sometimes have difficulties communicating, difficulties making friends, difficulties relating to people, to empathize with them sometimes. We don't have less empathy, but we do have difficulty of empathizing. But that's not because we don't have empathy, but that's because we have trouble reading someone, right? It's different, okay? It's different. Having no empathy and not being able to read someone are actually two different things. It's so interesting because most people assume the reason that people with autism are so bad at socializing is because maybe they get like a sensory overload, or because they can't empathize with people. Not true. But actually the truth may be that we don't find it as rewarding. Have you thought about that? Like, imagine for example how children with autism don't like to be touched or hugged sometimes by their parents, right? And their parents, they think something is wrong with their child, and then maybe they force them to make physical contact. Maybe maybe those dads who sent their autistic son to summer camp and force them to be social and force them to make friends. And when they fail to do so, maybe the parents are disappointed. They think the child is rude, or maybe that they're feeling bad. Because in their mind, like, somebody who fails to engage in social activity, maybe they're sad, right? But have you actually thought about it from our point of view? And that maybe we just really don't enjoy these things as much. When you have autism sometimes and you have, people are concerned for you because you have an inability to socialize. People try to force you to a party, and they want you to have fun at the party. But the truth is you can't. Because compared to the average person, your brain doesn't release the happy juice that much, right? Just like being touched or being hugged or kissed by someone. Have you ever thought about the fact that, for example, to someone else, it may not feel as pleasurable as it does to you? And that also explains some of our inabilities, right? Because when socializing, when talking with someone, releases the happy juice in your brain, you're going to want to do it more. The average person, the neurotypical, the normal, non-autistic person, they like to socialize, they like to make friends. They enjoy it, it makes them happy. The autistic people struggle with this is also because of an inability to perform, but also because of an inability to enjoy it. And motivation and the ability to do something are strongly correlated. If you have less motivation to perform certain behaviors, you're going to be bad at them. It's that simple. Being good at something also stems, from your cognitive functions, but also your ability to simply enjoy said activity. The thing is, we are self-reinforcing animals. We constantly reinforce our own behaviors and improve them with a feedback loop of pleasure and maybe pain. You do something good, pleasure. You do something wrong, you feel sad, you feel pain. And it's the pleasure and pain that reinforces and corrects your own behaviors. If you don't feel the pleasure, you're not going to learn. It plays a part in learning, because learning is part of motivation as well, especially when you enjoy learning something, it's easy to learn. If you enjoy doing something, it will be easier to do. So yeah, have you ever thought about the fact that people with autism simply have a fundamentally altered dopaminergic reward pathway in their brain? And that means that when I do things the average person wouldn't really enjoy, I can actually really enjoy them. Like, maybe when you hug an autistic person and they don't feel as good, don't feel bad for them. Maybe when they look at moths, it feels like they're getting a hug. It's kind of like that, isn't it? It's kind of how I would describe it. Like, some of the things in your life that you don't enjoy as much as a neurotypical person are often substituted by other activities that you may enjoy as much as the activities that you don't enjoy doing, right? It's not like we are not able to be happy or not able to feel pleasure. We do, and we can. We just get it from different things. So yeah. If you're autistic and you're watching this video and this is a revelation to you, then I'm happy. I knew some of this stuff, but when I'm actually reading it so in detail, it's like, wow, that actually explains a lot about myself too. Now a little bit more. Several studies have directly contrasted patterns of neural activity in the context of social versus non-social incentives. In the first study of this kind, it compared a social reward, pictures of smiling faces combined with written praise, and it compared this social incentive with monetary rewards. Relative to typically developing peers, children with ASD exhibited attenuated activation in the ventral striatum. Yeah, you guys probably don't know what it is. In response to social rewards. This response was not, however, associated with social behavior. Using similar social and non-social reinforcements, some research found that individuals with autism spectrum syndrome showed hypoactivation in mesocorticolimbic circuitry. Yeah, there's that word again, I can barely pronounce it. In some parts of the hypothalamus and amygdala in response to both social and monetary incentives. Although the nature of reward processing difficulties in autism spectrum syndrome remains unclear, such studies have provided preliminary evidence of a role for reward circuitry dysfunction in the neuropathology of autism spectrum syndrome. So, yeah, just to summarize all of this, our subjective perception of pleasure is different. We may experience pleasure differently, and we may get pleasure from different sources. It's that simple. And probably not from the things that the regular person may enjoy doing, such as being social, and other things in life that people with autism simply may be less interested in, because it doesn't make them feel that good. That is interesting, wow. Wow, it's actually for me also a revelation. So, I think that is the best that I could do at explaining it. I hope this cleared it up for you. Autistic fans, parents of autistic children, whoever is watching this. I think it makes sense, really. It will help explain the behaviors of you, of some of your loved ones. Don't be offended or weirded out if people with autism are seemingly doing things that wouldn't make them happy. Maybe their lifestyle is making them happy. And maybe you're just thinking in a selfish way, you know? Maybe you see someone who doesn't like cuddling and hugging and being physical, and you feel bad for them, like, wow, they must be lonely and depressed. Maybe not. Maybe they're not experiencing pleasurable things that you are capable of experiencing. But people with autism are also capable of experiencing pleasurable things that you can't. It goes both ways. So yeah, it's not wrong, it's not worse, it's just different. So, and I suppose that's why people with autism indulge in their interests sometimes with an extremely high level of interest, high level of, I don't know, obsession. I'm getting tired, it's very late, and I feel like I've driven the point across maybe. And for me, the thing with insects is if I see like an interesting insect, a butterfly or a moth that I really like, I don't know. It does make me feel really good in some way. It's like a drug that I crave, you know, I constantly need more of it and better. So I like thinking about it, writing about it, and it explains me. And now I'm really gonna go to sleep because it's like 4 o'clock. I felt like venting, reading you guys some science, but yeah. Let's maybe move on to the next part, the how social behaviors have been affected with autism and how that relates to me. Yeah. A new chapter once again. If you are still watching, you're a champion. I wouldn't really expect anyone to watch a video I make that is this extremely long. Especially if it's not about moths, the thing I'm kind of famous for. If you're still watching this and you have watched all the other content, you are a champion, really. You're a champion. I realize this is not going to get many views, but the point of this video is not to get a lot of views, it's to vent. It feels good to talk about myself and my issues for once, and also topics I really care about and that are central themes to my life, you know? It's like my audience will get to know me better, more personally, if they will listen to this. But in this video, I'm going to put all my eggs in one basket. Whee! So let me tell you that we've been through the whole list and range of symptoms that come with autism, and some of them are also applicable to me, but they are kind of minor things that add up, that don't deserve their own whole chapter in this video. So if you're interested in listening to that, I will tell you some of that. One of the things that people with autism on the autistic spectrum may experience is a disrupted sleeping rhythm, circadian rhythm, or basically things like insomnia. As far as I can remember, at least, I have notoriously terrible ability to maintain a healthy rhythm. I often struggle to fall asleep, I suppose. Funny thing is that, sometimes you can't sleep and you start messaging your friends at night like, hey, who's up? Who's up for a chat? I can't sleep. And typically I'm one of the first people to respond to that, because I'm almost always awake, or so it seems. But it is the reality of the situation. I have a pretty bad sleeping schedule, a pretty bad sleeping rhythm. Sometimes I do kind of struggle to fall asleep, I suppose. So yeah, it is one of the symptoms, I suppose, that's typically described for autism, although I guess it's relatable to people who don't have autism as well, because, you know, the modern man also really struggles with this issue in general, and perhaps so do many of my viewers who don't have this condition. But it's just something small, like it doesn't ruin my life, it's not like something that has a terrible impact on me, but it can be kind of annoying. Oops, there's something in my eye, sorry for the... But yeah, so why is that? Well, I'm not going to have a paper to back everything up, but just for this time, okay, I have just one paper for this time, okay? It's a publication, a scientific one. It's called Dysregulation of Circadian Rhythms in Autism Spectrum Disorders. And it reads, background: the alterations in neurological and neuroendocrine functions observed in the autism spectrum disorder involves environmentally dependent dysregulation of neurodevelopment in interaction with multiple coding gene effects. Disturbed sleep-wake patterns as well as abnormal melatonin and glucocorticoid secretion show the relevance of underlying impairment in the circadian rhythm system to the behavioral phenotype of autism spectrum syndrome. So there's a lot of words. Most important one here to understand is melatonin. In humans, melatonin plays an important role in the regulation of sleep cycles, I suppose. And its production is also influenced by the detection of light. And there was also another difficult word in here that was glucocorticoid secretion. It's basically any steroid hormone. I'm not going to get into the whole details of hormones, it's just trying to focus on the details, but these things do, both of them do play a role in sleeping and your circadian regulation, or in this case dysregulation. And thus understanding the mechanisms involved in the circadian dysregulation autism spectrum syndrome could help to identify early biomarkers to improve the diagnosis and therapeutics, as well as providing a significant impact. Autism as a disorder of biological Autism as a disorder of biological rhythms. Alterations in circadian sleep-wake rhythm have frequently been reported in autism. More specifically, reduced total sleep and longer sleep latency, as well as nocturnal and early morning awakenings, are often observed in individuals with autism spectrum syndrome. Again, I like to use science because I don't want to be one of those influencers on YouTube who just gives their opinion subjectively and presents it as a fact. And oh god, I shouldn't have done it. Anyway, it's important for you guys to understand that I do my research. Okay, I'm not just going to sit here and vomit out my opinion. Well, most of this is my opinion, but I like to base my opinion based around, tangible evidence I can find, even though maybe it's a little bit cherry-picked, because admittedly I am not a doctor, I am not a neurologist, I'm not a medical specialist, I'm just a guy with a camera. But everyone can read publications and they do lend some support for the symptoms that we experience. So yeah, basically early morning awakenings. And for me, what's funny is I tend to gravitate towards almost a nocturnal lifestyle. Like if I don't have work, if I don't have any obligations like in my life, let's say when if I am unemployed, because work often forces you to get up early. But if I would be like totally unemployed, no obligations, I would just be awake at night and fall asleep in the morning. I have that tendency. And even as a child, I would sometimes in the middle of the night get up out of my bed and start eating breakfast. My parents would be like, Bart, what the hell are you doing? And I was under the impression it was like morning. Because I don't know, I just woke up in the middle of the night thinking it's morning. And like my whole biorhythm, it doesn't really... it's often disturbed. I don't have a very nice rhythm that allows you to wake up every morning at 7 o'clock, fresh, to have bacon and eggs. It's like, no, like sometimes I sleep too short, sometimes I sleep too long, sometimes I don't sleep at all. Like, I remember when I had a job in a warehouse a few years ago, it wasn't uncommon for me to just work 2 or 3 days straight. And then one night go to bed really early and then sleep for 12 to 15 hours. I know it sounds really terrible and abnormal, but that's what it's like for me. Like, damn, it's hard it's hard for me to follow the rhythm that society has, right? It's like every human is a clock, and all you guys have a clock that's synchronized, but my clock is not synchronized. But I'm the one who is expected to keep up with you, Actually, for me, it would actually be great if I was self-employed, because like this terrible rhythm, terrible sleeping habits, they also contribute to my ability to not really always function as properly in a workplace, because of a total lack of sleep sometimes, and which leads to a lack of focus. I used to sometimes when I worked in that warehouse I discussed, I used to like just sleep in the lunchroom, in the canteen. People wouldn't bother me. I would just set an alarm clock in like 20 minutes, because my break was like 20 minutes. I would just lay my head down on the table, sleep for 20 minutes, and then wake up, go back to work. And it's kind of sad, It's kind of like, it's not that big of a problem actually, if I'm on my own. Because when I'm tired, I'll still fall asleep and eventually I'll wake up. It's when you try to fit such a dysregulated circadian rhythm in with a modern society that forces you to get up at the same time every day and go to sleep at the same time every day, That's when there's problems. So that kind of clashes with, the rhythm of humanity and the rhythm of society and the average sleeping rhythm. Now the modern man, the average person who works for his wages, already sleeps way too little. Like, I'm pretty sure many people like in America and Europe, those who have corporate jobs, get like 5 to 8 hours of sleep per day. which is very little. I think people need like, on average, like 7-8 hours of sleep, maybe even a little bit more than we get nowadays. So it's kind of bad. Like, people are already sleep deprived and stressed, but for me it's like worse. Now, this issue is not that big of a deal. Like, I can live with it. It's not as bad as all the other things that I discussed in the video, so that's why I wanted to put it as an afterthought. But it is there, and it is kind of annoying. Sometimes I just feel like I'm born with like a natural jet lag. That's what it feels like, a jet lag sometimes. Like you're just dysregulated, not synchronized with the way it should be. It's kind of annoying. Then again, I think a part of it's also my fault. It's the fact I drink a lot of energy drinks. We cannot blame that on autism. That's the fault of the fact I drink a lot of caffeine. My medication also contributes to it. Like I take pills, I'm on medication, methylphenidate, it's like meth, but a microdose of it. But in the brain it almost works the same. Funny how some medicines are almost the same as drugs. I mean, they are drugs, but you get what I mean, right? That stuff, it will destroy your sleep, combined with the caffeine, combined with the fact that I'm an influencer slash YouTuber, so I'm often up at night making videos, sitting behind a computer screen, and the light also messes with your sleep rhythm. So there's also a lot of other factors contributing, together with the fact I'm already bad at it, but the issue is exacerbated by a lot of bad personal choices that I make. So yeah, I'm often under stress too, so that also keeps me awake at night, so that's like vicious cycle kind of thing. Most of the time I can live with it, although sometimes it gets kind of overwhelming. So I guess that we can say that was egg number 1. Yay. Egg number 1, ladies and gentlemen. The kind of sleep thing that I have. It's not a big deal, but it is a deal, so felt like I did have to throw it out there. Let me see, what's another thing? Oh yeah. It's more about dependence, or independence that is, and it is like, or rather financial independence. I'm not that old, but I'm also getting too old to be dependent on like my parents and stuff. The good news is I found a little bit of financial success lately, also because of YouTube. Like this whole YouTube thing I do is also a business, and it helps me find work, it helps me find jobs, it helps me do many things that I love, like working for butterfly farms, selling and licensing footage to other channels or other companies. Sometimes they pay me. I've even was able to play in a film, and they paid me well for that. I was literally an actor in a film. Kind of stuff like that. It's kind of, it feels nice getting paid for the work that I do, but it's not enough to like make a living from. Look, it's not enough to justify doing this full time yet. I hope it will be someday. But that's the thing. YouTube is kind of like a lifeline in many ways, and when it comes to like stuff like employability, money sucks. I hate this stuff. I hate money, people. I hate it. And I don't think I'm completely unemployable, because I've had some respectable jobs. I've been a consultant for butterfly farms. I worked in natural history museums. That's a reasonable resume, right? But let's see, what else have I done? YouTube, trying to monetize this channel, that is. What else is there? Well, I guess I do have some minor successes. I've also worked in factories and warehouses, like minimum wage jobs. I was capable of having them several years without getting fired. So I'm not like one of those autistic people who cannot make a living. Thankfully, I can make a living, but I'm still kind of struggling with it. And it also ties into autism, because I don't really function at every kind of job. I'm very good at particular jobs, particular tasks, particularly those who involve maybe my passions a little bit, but those can be hard to get. Now I'm also a kind of like an independent entomologist / independent YouTuber, vlogger, content creator, whatever you want to call me. And it's hard in the first place if you are a small independent, well, business. I could call myself a business, you know. But I don't know, in some ways I do struggle to have a stable income. Part of it could be also my fault maybe, but let's just say that not every employer in the past has always been happy with what I can do. And it's also the fact I don't have an education, like I don't have a degree. So without a degree my options are already limited, right? So yeah, that's why I want to grow this channel, kind of like I feel this channel has a lot of potential for me if it would work out financially. The problem is YouTube did demonetize this channel. Like this channel is completely demonetized by YouTube, and they didn't even tell me why. That sucks, because after many years of struggling with myself, I finally found a way to monetize my passion. You know, it was like my extreme obsession for insects, which is in many ways a disability, would turn out to be a talent. And I was actually very happy to find out, like, wow, maybe this is not a disability, maybe it's a gift. Because my enthusiasm is entertaining. The way I can film insects is maybe entertaining. Letting people subscribe and watch my videos, you know. And I was making money from that until they sent an email that basically I broke some kind of rule or guideline. To this day they even refuse to tell me what rule or guideline it was that I broke. So yeah, that was kind of heartbreaking, to be honest. So because of that I'm now demonetized, and it's like, damn, you know, I had one chance to monetize the passion I have for insects and make something out of it and grow a business from it, and then it's like someone else comes along and takes the opportunity away. So yeah, that's why I've kind of turned to like crowdfunding. I call it begging, but that's kind of degrading. But when people like my content, sometimes they donate to it and they support me. That's basically the only income that I make from YouTube. But it's something and it helps. But then again, YouTube is maybe not also a sustainable career. I'd like to continue doing it as long as I can. But you also have to think of a plan A and B. Like, what if this YouTube thing doesn't work out? What am I going to have in 5 or 10 years, you know? Like, I invested a lot in this YouTube channel because I really believe in this channel and I believe in its mission a lot. But social media is so hard, it's so competitive. It's so hard to keep people engaged and monetize it and grow it. Like, damn, that's... I don't know, what if I'm going to be like 30 or 40 years old and my YouTube isn't as successful as I would have hoped to be after years of putting effort into it? Like, what's my backup plan? Where am I going to go? And there will be a gap on my resume because I haven't worked in a while just doing social media. So it's like, yeah, this is difficult, you know, it's difficult stuff. I just really wish there was a way I could get like funding or something for this channel, if there's such a thing. Like, is there something for that? Like receiving funding, a research grant, you know, just to document rare butterflies and moths. I think I see value in something like that, but that's not how it works, right? I mean, I could say something is valuable, but it's actually the market that decides this, right? Like, it's actually people who are willing to spend money on it, who are willing to give hard-earned money in exchange for content that they enjoy. Those are the people who actually determine the value, not me. But as somebody who does know a few things about biology, I think this has value. I think there's really... I'm sitting on something that could potentially perhaps grow big if I continue doing it and believing in it. But it's like, yeah, at what cost? You know, at what cost? Like, I don't want to like make YouTube videos for 10 years and then find out that my YouTube channel didn't work out, and then find out I don't have any work experience because I spent all my time making YouTube videos, and then I'll be like 40 years old, have to work at McDonald's for the rest of my life flipping burgers. Hey, no disrespect to people who work at McDonald's, but in fact I probably wouldn't even function at a McDonald's with some of the issues I have. So I would even be, I don't know, what else is there? It sucks that I have a talent that's hard to monetize, you know. It's like, if I was good at programming, I'd make money probably. If you're good at being a car mechanic, everybody wants to hire a car mechanic, but like a guy who films and breeds butterflies and moths, what's the value of that? Who's going to hire that, you know? Damn. Would be cool if like a company could hire me for a stable income or something. But that's not really possible. YouTube took the opportunity away. But yeah, it's also like the financial and employability thing that I often worry about. And I think many people with autism can relate to that, because their options in the workplace are way more limited. They can have great talents, but their talents can often be narrow and limited. So you kind of have to be a jack of all trades sometimes, you know? Like, you can be an amazing at chemistry, a brilliant chemist, but if you're really terrible at working with people in a team, you're still going to find less work than people who can, because when it comes to science or organic chemistry, you're often still required to work in a team at least, or at least exchange or allocate information somewhere else to mobilize it, you know. And if you can't really interact with people, doesn't matter how smart you are, no one wants to hire a person that's bad with working with others. Thankfully I don't have such social issues, but other people with autism can. So yeah, it's just saying that in general, I imagine many people with autism struggle to find work sometimes or make money the appropriate ways, I suppose. Yeah, something to talk about. Now people, I'm not going to overshare everything about my life, but what else is there? Oh yeah, one thing that's also kind of annoying, sorry, it was the soda, it's the fact that, well, I had like 60 driving lessons and very little progress. Turns out that I kind of really suck at driving a car as well. Is not being able to drive a car that much of a disability? Yes. It limits where you can work. I can't just, you know, drive back and forth to work. It's like, damn. When you drive a car, there's a lot of multitasking involved, and I just really struggle with that. I think I told it earlier in this video, so I'm not going to repeat the whole story again in great detail, but at one point I started going against traffic, ghost driving almost, stuff like that. It's a dangerous mistake to make, yeah? At least I had a driving instructor with me to correct me, otherwise it could have ended pretty badly. So me in a car could be a potential disaster, me driving a car, me driving a vehicle. Because I could make one tiny mistake that can result in the death of myself and others, you know? I actually haven't really given up yet. Maybe in the future sometime I would try again, doing driving lessons. I don't know, they're expensive. But if I do, I want to make sure that it's actually really possible for me to actually master driving and be able to drive a car. And maybe I would need an extraordinary amount of driving lessons that literally cost thousands of dollars. So what you gonna do, huh? What you gonna do? Maybe I need one of those driving instructors for special people. It was a joke, but it's also not a joke, it was also serious. But it's also not serious, because maybe I don't need it, maybe I do, I don't know. It's looking pretty bad overall. What the hell am I saying? I'm talking too much. But yeah, because if you want to go to other countries, it's nice if you can just rent a car. drive around, explore the country by yourself. That's hard if you're in my position. It's a little bit of freedom that's stripped away from you. Thankfully, I live in the Netherlands and my country has amazing public transport. Probably one of the best public transport in the world, next to countries like Japan. That's great. In the Netherlands you can go almost anywhere by bus or train, so that's fantastic. Almost anywhere, but I don't know, it's more problematic in some cases. Like, you want to work somewhere far away, it's still better to have a car instead, you know? Yeah, or if you have a job that requires you to go to different places each time, yeah, you just have like that versatility, that freedom. Also the fact that with a car you can transport a lot of stuff. Just drive around and stop anywhere you want in nature, and I can't, so I just use my bicycle or my public transport card to get where I want to be. But it's kind of just another one of those annoyances, those annoying things that once again restrict me in my freedom, you know, not being able to drive a car. I hope that maybe in the future I do find a way to work around that fact, I don't know. Also, I really shouldn't push my luck, because if it turns out that I really can't do this, then maybe I shouldn't try, because car accidents are no joke, you know. So I'm still finding myself on this one, but I made very little progress in like 60 driving classes, so that's kind of, I don't know. It is indicative of the fact that even if it's possible for me to get my license, theoretically, I would need way more practice than the average person, which may not also be financially sustainable. That sucks. So now I'm done talking about my favorite subject, which is of course myself. I have to give you guys a compliment because wow, you're still watching after all this time? Wow, you must be my #1 fan. I wonder how much views this video is going to get. Because from a YouTube perspective, making this video is really bad. It's not a subject most of my subscribers care about at all. It's so long that nobody's going to care about watching a video. I wouldn't watch like a 4 or 5 hour video about someone else's life. Why would somebody want to watch this? It just feels good to vent, you know, it's like a self-expression. If you're watching this though, epic props. You must be a fan of me. You must be a fan of this channel for sure. For this part of the video I would like to bust some myths, because there's a lot of ignorance and nonsense that surrounds people with autism, and I'm going to bust 4, maybe 5 if I feel like it, myths that are harmful to people like me, and we would like to get them out of this world, get rid of these myths. So I'm going to bring you myth number 1, acquired autism. Wow, very dramatic. No, but seriously, let's behave like adults for 1 minute. What does that mean? Acquired autism. Let me tell you, people. Acquired autism is the myth of becoming autistic. And let me say this very, very, very clearly. Autism is something that you are from birth. The moment you are born, you are autistic or not autistic. You cannot become autistic later in life. It's impossible. So, and I need to put this out there because there seem to be on the internet a lot of people that think that eating certain things can make you autistic, that consuming certain chemicals can make you autistic, that certain actions, medicines, things that you consume, and sometimes even vaccines are controversial because some people will claim that they will make you autistic. So let me be very, very clear on this issue. If you are a neurotypical person and you don't have autism, at no moment in your life will you ever become autistic. You can't. You cannot acquire autism. So why does this myth even exist in the first place? Well, interestingly, there is a number of environmental factors, things in the environment, that are correlated with autism. And these can be things like air pollution, certain pesticides, heavy metals, what else is there? Well, also the age of your parents, stuff like that. But it's very curious because people watching this right now are, wait, what? There's chemicals that can make you autistic? Reality isn't really that simple. There are certain environmental factors that correlate with autism. But first of all, when there's a correlation, we have to be really careful about implicating it as something that can cause autism. So let me tell you about some environmental factors first. Implied environmental risk factors for autism include being born too prematurely, soon after an older sibling, or to a mother with diabetes, for example. Over the past 15 years or so, scientists have investigated many of these factors to determine how they may contribute to autism. But there's very little definitive information. Some environmental risk factors with the most significance are indicated to be advanced parental age at the time of conception, exposure to certain toxins, prenatal exposure to air pollution or certain pesticides, maternal obesity, diabetes or immune system disorders, extreme prematurity or very low birth weight, any birth difficulty leading to periods of oxygen deprivation to the baby's brain. Although this topic does need more research and none of these are very conclusive yet, there are some correlations. Now, this is the part that most people will read, right? They will go on social media or on Google and they'll read an article, whoa, there's a correlation between air pollution and autism. There's a correlation between exposure to pesticides and autism. There's a correlation to heavy metals and autism. But there's one thing that they don't consider. All these environmental risk factors are prenatal. What does prenatal mean? It means when you are a baby developing in your mother's womb. That's right. This is not the part that many people know, because for some reason, I guess it doesn't make the headlines in the media. When there is a correlation between autism and certain pesticides, people on the news will write, oh, headline, this and this pesticide causes autism. But what they don't write, or the detail that they omit or put at the end of the article, is that it mostly affects pregnant mothers and their babies. Second of all, correlation does not implicate causation. There's many funny things in life that correlate, but are not causations. For example, did you know that there is a correlation between how many movies Nicolas Cage has played in and how many people have drowned in swimming pools? Now think about that for a second, and would you seriously consider the fact that people drown themselves in swimming pools because Nicolas Cage makes movies? Nah. Well, actually I could believe that because his movies are bad. Anyway, the point is, it's very, it's a very premature conclusion that any of these things cause autism. But it does seem that there is a correlation between the developing brain of an infant or a baby who is in a mother's womb and certain environmental agents. But again, this is prenatal. From the moment that you have been born, right, the fundamental makeup of your brain, with a fancy word we call it the neuroanatomy. The neuroanatomy, the way your brain is wired, it doesn't change after you are born. And as I explained before in this video, autism is a developmental disorder. Developmental, so that means something during the development went wrong. That affects your fundamental neuroanatomy, right? The way your brain was developed, the way your brain is wired. So this development, it happens in the womb. Like, I think a baby in the womb, they form like 200,000 neurons a minute when your brain is growing. And it's during this development that perhaps there can be certain environmental factors that may contribute to an atypical brain development. At the same time, we should still be very careful of blaming any of these external factors for autism. Because again, the correlation is not a causation, but there's also the fact that, sometimes environmental things can interact with genes. There can be a genetic and environmental component. For example, many of the traits that people have in our bodies and our minds are a combination of things that are regulated by our genes, our genetics, and our environment. A very common example is how tall you are. People have genes, and this is very simplified, but our genes often determine how tall we are, right? You can have the genetics of a very tall person, or you can have the genetics of a short person. But genetics is not the only thing that determines your length. For example, there is your diet. Imagine that you grow up in a poor and impoverished country where there's very little food. You could have the genetics of a very tall person, but it's pretty well known that when you grow up and you are malnourished as a child or teenager, chances are you're going to be short. Because that's how your body adapts to the environment, right? So you could have the genetics of a tall person and still end up short. So the genetics is not everything, but they play a role. On the other hand, if you give somebody who has genetics for a short person, and you give them a lot of food, they're not going to be tall. So your size can be determined by limiting environmental factors, for example, and external factors, such as your diet, right? You'll see in poor countries or where there's basically countries where there's hunger, where there's not enough food to feed the population a healthy diet. You'll see that people are on average less tall, they are shorter because they don't meet their nutritional requirements to grow the size that they could be with an optimal diet. And with a fancy word we call this the phenotype and the genotype. The genotype is basically the predisposition, is the genetic traits that determine your appearance, and the phenotype is basically your external appearance that's regulated by the environment and genetics, right? For example, well, the short and tall analogy. For example, I am tall. I'm a tall Dutch guy. My phenotype is being tall. My genotype is also being tall because I got all the external factors that help me grow to this size and the genetic factors. But maybe it's possible that for some people it's possible that, for example, they have something wrong with their brain and their brain produces too much hormone. And some people actually have like a brain tumor that causes them to produce abnormal growth hormone, which makes them grow tall to abnormally large sizes. So in this case, these people are taller than is determined by their genetics, you know, because I doubt these people have the genetics of being like 2.5 meters long. It's actually because of a brain tumor or an aberration when it comes to their hormonal or endocrine system that makes them grow enormously tall. And in this case, their genotype may actually be that of an average-sized person, but their phenotype is that of a very tall person. In this case, because of external factors. So saying that when there is a correlation between pollutants, certain dangerous chemicals and autism, it's still very dangerous to say, well, these things cause autism, because it's actually possible for there still to be a genetic component, despite these external factors. But really important for you to understand is, if you are not autistic, you cannot become autistic anymore. You are autistic at birth or not. It is possible that autism is exacerbated because of entire external factors during the developmental phase in the womb. And especially pregnant mothers could be vulnerable to exposure to certain things in their environment that would make their children have the tendency to be autistic. But even then, the external factors cannot just be blamed, because it's actually possible for there also to be a genetic component plus a environmental factor, like the genotype and the phenotype. And to support what I'm saying, because it's hard, my native language is not English, and like this is really complex things to explain for my YouTube audience, right? Not in my native language. So I found a website called Spectrum News, yeah, and it's about a blog about autism. But I like they use scientific references, I like to do it too. And they wrote this text that I want to read to you. So let me get comfortable. Hope you're comfortable too for this long ass video. From Spectrum News. Last year alone, scientists published more than 100 papers, wow, on events during pregnancy that can influence a child's odds of having autism. Genes determine about 50 to 95% of that risk. But that means there's more to the story than just that genetic predisposition. So yes, this means that actually there are things in your environment that interact with your probability of being autistic. But it also means there is a genetic component. And it also means that the external risk is only there during the pregnancy or the development of your brain. So this is said by Danielle Fallin, a genetic epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Environmental factor contributions must also factor in. The baby's earliest environment, the womb, is critical, because the fetal brain produces about 25,000 neurons every minute during pregnancy, and experiences that interfere with that process can affect the developing brain in lasting ways. Makes sense. Studies have linked autism to a number of factors in pregnancy, among them the mother's diet, the medicines she takes, and her mental, immune, and metabolic conditions, including preeclampsia, which is apparently a form of high blood pressure, is also an external factor for autism, and gestational diabetes. Other preliminary work has implicated the quality of the air she breathes and the pesticides that she is exposed to. And some research suggested birth complications and also birth timing may also play a role. The relationship between many of these factors and autism is still speculative. Important. The question of causality is a burden that's very difficult to fulfill, says Brian Lee, an epidemiologist at Drexel University in Philadelphia. This is generally true of research into environmental exposures, and particularly so for studies in pregnant women. Researchers cannot ethically expose pregnant women to possible risk, so observational studies can only identify correlations and not causes. And the results of animal studies do not always extrapolate to people. But researchers are starting to uncover biological threads that can tie some of these prenatal exposures together. Many affect common biochemical pathways previously implicated in autism, such as those involving inflammation and aberrant immunity in both mother and baby. Each may only contribute a little bit of risk here and there, Lee says, but it's crucial to try and understand how all the pieces add up. And here comes something interesting. They did studies on twins with autism. Studies of autism in twins date back to 1977, when researchers provided the first evidence that autism is heritable, rather than springing solely from environmental factors. Here you have it, people. Autism is mostly heritable and genetic, rather than just coming from environmental factors. Although the environmental factors can make the probability of you being autistic higher if you are exposed to them during the developmental phase in the womb. But you as a healthy person cannot become autistic because of something you ate or consumed. That's not possible. A 1995 follow-up of 40 twin pairs also found a so-called concordance rate for autism of 92% for identical twins and 10% for fraternal twins. Several other twins, I love this kind of stuff, I'm into science, I'm not a scientist, but I love reading this kind of stuff, because several other twin studies have yielded rates that suggest a strong genetic contribution. The new findings are based on data from the twins' early development study, which follows twins born in England and Wales between 1994 and 1996. The researchers selected participants from hundreds of families in which at least one twin has received a score suggestive of autism on the Childhood Autism Spectrum Test or has been diagnosed with autism. So they followed twin pairs throughout their life that were diagnosed or showed signs of autism in childhood. From this sample they found 146 twin pairs in which at least one sibling received an initial autism diagnosis. They then performed in-depth diagnostic tests as well as cognitive assessments during home visits to 129 of these families. Parents also provided reports on each twin's development. From this information, the researchers confirmed that 141 cases of autism and identified 40 children who have autism-like traits or broad autism phenotype. If one twin has autism, the odds of the other twin having the disorder range from 62 to 94%. So, if one identical twin has autism, the other twin has a very large chance of also being autistic. And because they share the same genetic makeup, this already suggests there is a very strong genetic component. So if we look at identical twins from the fraternal twins, the chance of the other twin being autistic is between 5 to 61%, which is lower, but still significant, I suppose. A statistical model then produced an estimate of the relative pool of genetic and environmental factors on autism risk. Genetic influences account for 56 to 95% of the risk and environmental factors, such as prenatal exposure to chemicals and parental age at conception. These contribute 5 to 44%. So the genetic influence is 56 to 95%, and the environmental influence is 5% to 44%. So it seems the genetic influence is way more important, but the environmental influence does play a role. This statistical model also supports the idea that autism traits and skills are continuously distributed throughout the general population, with people who have autism at one extreme. However, the model does not account for interactions between genes and the environment. So why am I saying all of this? Because there's a lot of ignorance. For example, some parents, and I've read these experiences before online, of parents of autistic children, and the fact that the children of other parents are not allowed to play with their autistic child. Imagine sending your child to school who has autism and the other kids refuse to play with him because the other parents don't want their kids to play with your autistic kids. Why? Because they're afraid that their children may become autistic because of your child who has autism. They're basically afraid that their children will be infected with autism from playing with your autistic child. It sounds really ignorant, but this kind of ignorance exists. Autism is heritable and mostly genetic, although your probability of being autistic can be exacerbated by environmental factors to some degree. It's like winning the lottery, right? Being autistic is like winning the lottery. And the genetic factor is like buying a lottery ticket, right? So to win the lottery you need to have a ticket. That makes sense, right? But it doesn't guarantee that you will win the lottery. Buying a ticket increases your probability of winning the lottery. And you need to have a ticket to win the lottery in the first place, right? So you having a lot of genetic factors means that you have a lottery ticket. A lottery ticket, that means that you probably can win the lottery or have autism. Now the environmental factors, it's more like buying more lottery tickets, right? The only way to increase your probability of winning the lottery is buying more tickets. If I have one lottery ticket, my chances of winning the lottery are low. If I have 1,000 lottery tickets, my chances of winning the lottery is much higher. If I buy 1,000,000 lottery tickets, maybe I'm actually somewhat likely of winning the lottery. So these environmental factors, it's kind of like giving somebody more tickets. Well, having tickets in the first place is like the genetic factor. Now, this metaphor doesn't really work for 100% because I realized that, having the tickets and getting more tickets, it sounds kind of different, but it's also the same. External factors are not predetermined that way, I suppose. But man, do you guys understand what I'm trying to say here? Your likelihood of being autistic can increase if you have the genetic predisposition, but it isn't entirely determined by the environment, right? Do you guys follow this? This is so complex, I know. It's hard to listen to because it's so complex, but you can have the genetic predisposition that will very likely make you an autistic person. And this probability can become higher in the first place only if you have the predisposition by certain environmental factors, who I should say are not even proven that well. Many of these environmental factors are debated. Again, I'm not a scientist, but a lot of geneticists and stuff are critical of some of these studies as well. But the truth is, to be autistic, you have to be born with autism. And there is a lot of ignorance about vaccines and the fact that some things, I don't know, mercury in your diet or certain types of radiation or pesticides will make you autistic. The answer is no. If you are a healthy, functioning, non-autistic person, there is nothing that I can do to you to make you autistic. You are born autistic or you are not autistic. You are autistic from birth. If you are not, you will never become it later in life. You cannot acquire autism later in life. You can't. You can only acquire it after you were born as a baby. You can't acquire autism if you're not a baby. In fact, I think even when the baby is born, most of its brain already stopped developing, so it really mostly happens in the womb of pregnant women, determined by mostly genes and a little bit by the environment, but a combination of both. So, do you guys understand what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to debunk the myth that, autism is contagious, or that there's things that you can do in life that will make you sick with autism, because a lot of people are afraid of this. And this is ignorant. It is ignorant, and it often leads to weird forms of discrimination. And it's also politicized, like, oh, people, don't take this drug, don't take this treatment because it will make you autistic. No, it can't, trust me. Nothing that you do can make you autistic. If you are diagnosed, you were already autistic all your life. There's nothing that can change the fundamental layout of your brain. Now, humans have something called neuroplasticity, and it means that your brain can adapt to certain changes. As your cognitive functions change and improve, and so do your experiences, certain parts of your brain may start functioning differently, or even if you have brain damage, some parts of your brain will assume new functions to compensate for the ones you lost. And this is what neurologists call neuroplasticity. But this is not the same as a fundamental makeover of your neuroanatomy. The way your brain is wired, the nerves, your brain cells, the synapses and the way they communicate, the development of your brain is predetermined since your birth, more or less. And therefore, while there is a certain degree of plasticity in the way your brain functions, its fundamental layout will not change. It simply doesn't. Nothing can make you autistic. And this is the worst myth that you see online. Because there's like Karens, making everything political. I don't know, liberals give our children medicines that make them autistic, blah blah, the stuff you see on Facebook. I'm actually very careful with repeating the actual things I see on the internet, because YouTube could ban me for misinformation, even if I'm speaking out against misinformation. Just repeating the misinformation could put my channel at risk. But you guys understand what I say. The idea that autism is contagious is thankfully very rare, but it's a very dangerous one. And in this world of conspiracy theorists, we don't want this idea to resurface. Imagine if people thought that what I have is contagious, that they're afraid of me, that they think that I'm someone who is damaged, or, I don't know, consumed something terrible that made me sick. Now, that's just nonsense, The science is against you, just read the fucking book. The ignorance makes me sick on this, to be honest. And I really had to speak out against this. And people really don't know how to interpret statistics and science anymore. People are scientifically illiterate and just read headlines. It's the media's fault too, for just, publishing a lot of garbage headlines based on complex subject matter like this. Like, even I struggle to complain something, but if I work at CNN, I would just write, oh, certain pollutants are correlated with autism, oh no! And 10,000s of mothers across the world start sharing their concerns and think their child has been poisoned and will become autistic, and that's so ignorant, that's so ignorant. Stop doing that. Autism is something that you have since birth. And it is an abnormal development of the brain And it's very simple. When you are anything but a baby, your brain is not developing anymore. The development is completed. It's not going to change. So, had to get it off my chest. Myth number 2 I would like to debunk. Autism makes you asocial or not social at all. This is a myth that I would like to debunk. Now, one thing is true. People with autism are often more prone to exhibiting certain antisocial behaviors and are generally less inclined to behave socially, but that's actually different from being asocial. A lot of people who are diagnosed with autism spectrum syndrome do have to cope with loneliness and isolation most of their life. So people with autism may struggle in social situations. They may struggle to form meaningful connections with other people. But that doesn't mean they are asocial. People with autism do actually, just like any other human, require to be understood. They require friendship, support, love, etc., just like anyone else. And the reason that they may struggle socially is due to a number of reasons. First of all, there are sensory issues with people who have autism. I explained it before. There's an abundance of synaptic connections between the neurons, so this makes it more difficult to not be overwhelmed with information. And the thing is, when there's social interaction, there's actually a lot of stimuli, such as facial expressions, voice, intonation, abstract meaning of language. There's a lot of involved, especially if somebody is touching you, is close to you. That's a lot of sensory impressions that may be overwhelming, which may cause people with autism to perform very poorly in social situations. There's also the fact that people with autism, in some instances, have trouble interpreting signs and language, which makes them seem as less empathic. But it's not that people with autism don't have empathy. They do have empathy. It's just that they struggle to see things from another person's perspective sometimes. And that sounds like, I mean, that's almost like a description of empathy, right? But it's like there's actually some disorders that can actually make you totally unempathic, like some forms of psychopathy or what's that called again? Personality disorder that damn, I forgot the name of it. Sociopathy is the name. Some people who are sociopaths, for example, or sociopathic behavior, may actually not be able to feel empathy for others. Not always, again, a huge generalization. They may also just have less empathy. But I think that misinterpreting social cues is different from not being able to feel empathy entirely. So it's like somebody gives you a book and you try to read the text, and but you don't understand the text very well, right? And somebody comes along, you know, they give you like a book about Harry Potter, you try to read Harry Potter, and they ask you, oh, what's the name of the villain? And you can't remember the name of the villain because, I don't know, you forgot who Voldemort is or something. And the conclusion is, wow, you must be blind because, I don't know, you were unable to read the book, so you must be blind. It's more complicated than that. Maybe you're not blind, you can see, you can even read the text. But maybe there's something in your understanding that made you miss the cues to make the dots connect, which maybe this is a little bit of a semantic argument, because of course that may also be empathy, I suppose. Anything that makes you miss some cues that make you empathize with people is still empathy. But it's more like you're totally incapable of feeling empathy for others, but you're missing some of the cues that make you interpret someone's emotions, right? It's not like you recognize, oh, this person is in pain, but I don't care because I don't have empathy. It's more like, oh, you don't recognize the fact that they're in pain in the first place. Do you understand? And that's how autists often seem less empathic. For example, maybe they would empathize if they knew or could understand the person was in pain, but they just don't understand the expression or the social language, you know? It's something like that. Truth is, people with autism can be lonely. They can be isolated or neglected because when you don't exhibit social behaviors, of course, people are going to be less inclined to be social with you. And then there's also the fact that what we discussed this also before in this long ass video, that people with autism, for example, have a lower reward value for social interactions. That means that when you make a friend, when you have a mutual, a reciprocal social connection with someone, it makes you feel good, it makes you motivated to behave socially. But in the brain of people with autism, being social may release less hormones like dopamine and serotonin, which makes us feel good, which means the reward value for social behaviors is lower. That means we experience less happiness, less joy from being social. Like compared to a regular, normal, neurotypical person, we feel less satisfied by social interaction, right? But that doesn't make us completely asocial. It makes us less social, right? And I think this is an important myth to debunk, because I think sometimes in media people with autism are depicted as these people who, who just want solitude all of the time and don't care about people. It's true that maybe someone with autism may require more personal space, and they may go longer periods of being alone without feeling lonely because they crave social interaction less. But to some extent, many of us, most of us, dare I say, still are social creatures. Maybe just don't like touching or hugging or being social every day because we don't have the energy for it. But I don't know. It's important to know that people with autism are capable of feeling empathy, are capable of being social, in a lot of cases are capable of feeling lonely or depressed and isolated because of a lack of social interaction. Can be bad for the mental health of someone with autism. And that may be hard. Now, if you struggle socially, you struggle to make friends, and you're less social than most people. To most people, that feels like a rejection. But maybe your social life just operates on a lower level. But that doesn't mean that society should just drop you, like you don't want to do, like not anyone wants to do anything with you. Now let's talk about me, my favorite subject. Now here's a fun fact. For a person with autism, I am remarkably social. In fact, I am so social and extroverted that the people who diagnosed me with autism spectrum disorder when I was about 15 or 16, they almost refused to give me the diagnosis because, when you use the diagnostic tools, I believe one of them, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the major diagnostic criteria is having social issues or struggling socially. Now, do I struggle socially? Let me show you. Hey, wait a second. Why did I blur the faces of some of the people in these photos? Well, that's because I respect their privacy. They are kind of private photos, and I'm not the kind of person to use without consent somebody's picture, even though most of these people are friends of mine. My point is, like, I clearly don't struggle socially. I'm probably one of the most extroverted autistic people you can find. The people who diagnosed me with autism a long time ago, they said the same. They said, well, Bart, we've worked with people with autism for decades, and you are really exceptional when it comes to you being social. I approach people very easily. I am very approachable. I'm very expressive. I do show a whole wide range of emotions. I should say I do have like minor social issues. One of them is the fact that my facial expressions are not often as expressive as I really feel on the inside. For example, I could be really happy and still look like this. Like, I could win the lottery. Wow, I just won $1 million. I'm like that sometimes. But on the inside, I'll be really happy. Like, yeah, I won $1 million. But people are like, Bart, like, why are you so grumpy? La? It's kind of like a resting bitch face, as people call it. I often exaggerate my facial expressions. Maybe you notice this on YouTube. Maybe it's a form of masking that I've learned. Like, when I'm talking like this, I'm moving my hands and my eyebrows. But for me, this is not my natural body language. I'm playing it up. A lot of what I'm doing on YouTube is playing it up. Typically, if I were to be just myself, this is probably how I would just communicate or prefer to communicate with my audience. But I understand that if I behave this way, it's not really that engaging to most of you, and therefore you guys will not be interested in watching my videos, since watching YouTube videos to most people is also an emotional experience. Therefore, watching somebody who is like not very expressive or doesn't seem to be very enthusiastic, despite the fact I do harbor a lot of those feelings on the inside, will result in less views and subscribers. And therefore, I learned to behave in such a way to convey my emotions more, even though maybe that body language is not entirely natural to me. People with more low-functioning autism may have more trouble masking this, so they just seem stoic and not very expressive. Doesn't mean that they are not feeling emotions, though. They are. They just don't maybe express them, because, laughing, crying, sometimes it's also just a form of communication to your environment. And if you feel less need to display your emotions, you're less inclined to show that kind of stuff, even if you feel just as bad or just as good. So yeah, point is, people with autism may be less social, they may be less empathic, but they're not asocial and they're not unempathic. Most of us actually are capable of feeling happiness, sadness, but also social feelings like loneliness, friendship, love. Yeah, we can feel it like any normal person. It's not like we are total robots. We are not. And that seems to be a stereotype that you see in media, so I just wanted to debunk that. Let's move on to the next myth. Another myth that I would like to debunk, myth number 3. Yeah, this is the longest video ever, I know, I don't care, you're gonna watch it. Another myth I would like to debunk is autism makes you dumber or makes you smarter. Both of them are actually a stereotype. Let's start with dumber. Or let me just see, when I look up on YouTube, when I look up people with autism, let me see some of the people with autism that YouTube shows me in the search results, okay?
Ow, 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 ow,
Now, first and foremost, okay, and I'm saying this with the utmost respect for the people that we just showed in this video who clearly have a severe case of autism and maybe other underlying issues too, which are often called comorbidities, that can be connected with autism but may not fall in the category of autism. But if you take a look at these people and you compare them to somebody like me, do I behave like this? The answer is no. I don't behave like this. Unfortunately, there is a number of people that assumes I do when I say that I have autism. And the thing about autism is that autism is a spectrum. Yeah, there's the word spectrum again. Autism is a spectrum, and people who have autism are often referred to, for example, as high functioning or low functioning. Now, high functioning and low functioning are actually not clinical terms. In reality, it is a spectrum, spectrum of intelligence. If you have autism, your intelligence can be anything, just like a normal person. You can have an average intelligence, you can have a high level of intelligence, or a lower one. Some people have such severe autism that it gets to a point where it could be a mental disability, but not all of us do. So that's the first stereotype that may exist, is that all people with autism are low functioning. Some of us are actually very high functioning people. And you can assume why that's a hurtful stereotype, because when people look at, autistic people on social media, and they see a lot of examples of low functioning people, they'll assume that, for example, I'm also somebody who has mental breakdowns or uncontrolled motor movements and stuff like that. Now, all respect to these people, because they can't help having such a condition, right? But it's not true that all of us are like that. Some of us are, which should be acknowledged, by the way. These people deserve to get help. They need help. So I'm trying not to be condescending, right? Because it almost sounds like I'm trying to distance myself, like, I'm not low functioning like them. I'm a smart autist, But it is a stereotype. So without trying to distance myself from them, their problems are just as valid as mine, and they may have the same condition that I do. There is a massive difference in a level of functioning. And assuming that all of us are like that all of us are very profoundly mentally disabled, is a pretty ignorant thing to assume. So a lot of people actually with autism spectrum syndrome have average or above average intelligence. And some of them may actually excel and function very well in society, and some of us don't. So you have to really understand that the way it affects us is so variable, and the way it affects your intelligence is so variable as well. Like, this is not something you can generalize, right? But unfortunately, it often happens. Now, this leads me to the other side of the coin. The stereotype that autism makes you smarter or makes you a genius. This is also a stereotype that exists. Who doesn't remember, for example, the movie Rain Man?
Ah, yes. Who doesn't remember the movie Rain Man? A somewhat famous movie where somebody discovers their autistic brother has a special talent pertaining to moths and capitalizes on it by exploiting his talent in casinos, by winning a lot of money. Of course, this isn't the whole plot of the movie, there's more blah 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 going on, but this is the only part I want to highlight for you. It's about somebody with an artistic talent.
Yeah, the movie Rain Man is about somebody discovering that, I believe, his autistic brother has a super talent for math. And they make a lot of money going to casinos because, I don't know, he has like a gift for figuring out probabilities and counting cards, etc. Hey, I'm not a gambler, I don't know how that works. It's a very influential movie. Is it a realistic movie? In some ways, yes, but it's also really played up. But I just discussed how there is a stereotype of how people with autism may be dumber or low functioning. But there is also a stereotype that some of us are like these brilliant savant geniuses. Just have a look on what we can find on YouTube.
Very, very heterogeneous. Each individual is different from the next. But from even the earliest descriptions of autism, it was noticed that at least in some cases, there are indications of special talents. And the idea is that this is true for about a third of the cases, which is a large group, but it's not everybody.
Now, some of you guys may say, Bart, why do you care about this? Don't you want people to think you're smart? Don't you want people to assume that you're a genius? I would be happy if people thought that I were a genius. Well, it's actually a very harmful stereotype as well. Think about it. I just showed you a few minutes ago some videos of people with autism who are very low functioning and may need constant supervision and care. Imagine you are a person who really struggles with low functioning autism in their life. That's very unfortunate, right? It will make your life so much harder. And now imagine that people think that your disability is a superpower. Like, isn't that offensive? It is, if you think about it, it's offensive. Maybe it's more offensive to assume that somebody is smarter than they are than assuming that they are dumb. Because, when you meet someone with autism and you don't understand what they may be going through and they may experience a lot of problems in their life, and you assume that they are somehow a genius or something, you're kind of downplaying their issues, you know? You're not looking at the problems that they have, but instead you're projecting a stereotype that maybe, wow, like this person has a gift, he has a talent, you know? And it's true, some people with autism, especially because how deeply we indulge in some of our talents and interests, may actually be gifted. It's true. There is people with autism that can, from their memory, draw a whole portrait of a city that's accurate. Like, people like that exist. There is people with autism who are so interested and preoccupied in maths that they are math geniuses, right? It exists. So this stereotype is rooted in some truth. Artistic talent can exist, and in some cases it can be extraordinary, but it's really the exception of the rule. And it's pretty rude to assume that all of us are some kind of brilliant genius or a scientist or whatever. And that's really the two kinds of stereotype that I deal with. Because when you tell people that you have autism, from my experience, they either assume that you are like mentally challenged or that you are some kind of super genius. And both of the stereotypes to me are annoying. Like, don't assume what I am capable of. Don't assume my intelligence, okay? If you assume that I am more low functioning than I really are, then you are downplaying me and my abilities. But if you assume that I am more capable and more intelligent and more functioning than I really are, that's also harmful because, well, then you are dismissing some of my issues. So please don't assume our intelligence and what we are capable of. Some people with autism were brilliant or famous scientists and had particular talents. But some of them struggle to even leave the house without a nurse or supervision, and both of them are valid. And both of them coexist. So don't assume that we are one of the either. Some people with autism are neither, and are just in the middle with average intelligence and average functioning. So both of them, of these stereotypes, are just that. Stereotypes. Don't assume what somebody who has a developmental disorder is capable of. Maybe ask them. You know, here's a fun fact. I remember once dating a girl from Tinder. Yeah, I do that. Could you believe it? And when I told her that I have autism, she said, "Oh, that's like the Ferrari of mental illnesses." That's a literal quote from her. Like, wow, you have autism. That's like the Ferrari of mental illnesses. And like, what? And she was like, yeah, it's like a gift, right? That makes you like talented and whatever. And like, I don't know. I don't know what to say to stuff like that. You run into it from time to time. So, people assume that kind of stuff sometimes, unfortunately. So, how does autism actually affect your intelligence? How does it really? For that we can look at some of the science, but first let me tell you how intelligence is distributed in the average person. It's distributed on a model that's called the bell curve or the normal distribution. And to show you how that works, perhaps it's better if I show you an image.
IQ shows a normal distribution, also known as a bell curve, which is a type of probability distribution, which means that around 68.27% of people fall within one standard deviation of the mean IQ, which is 100. Around 95.45 people fall within two standard deviations of the mean IQ, and around 99.73% of people fall within three standard deviations of the mean IQ. In other words, about 68% of the general populations have an IQ between 85 and 115, and about 95% of the general population has an IQ between 70 and 130. About 99.73% of the general population has an IQ between 65 and 145, and the remaining 0.72% are the outliers on both ends.
So what's going on with the intelligence of autistic people? Well, if you look at the distribution of their intelligence, it's more like
this instead. What is particularly surprising is that autistics have an inverted bell curve for IQ. In other words, there are relatively few autistics with an average IQ. We tend to be at either extreme of intelligence, both high and low. Call it extreme intellectual polarization, if you will. In the image below, the first bar graph indicates the IQs of Dutch autistic populations, which is from my country, as measured by the Netherlands Autisme Register, the NAR, the Dutch Autism Register. The second bar graph indicates the IQs of the general population. The lighter the color blue, the higher the IQ. And look at how much more autistic people had an IQ of 70 or lower compared to neurotypicals. 7.5% compared to 2.3%. But also notice that 53.1% of autistic people are more than one standard deviation above the average IQ, whereas in the neurotypical population only 60% are more than one standard deviation above the average IQ. And almost 16% of us have an IQ higher than 130 compared to 2.3% in the general population. Based on these statistics, autistics have a far better chance of having an IQ that is higher than non-autistics. But there is also a larger probability for us to have an IQ that is lower than the IQ of people who are not autistic. Basically, we are more likely to be far above average intelligent or below average intelligent. Now, of course, the picture of an inverted bell curve that I just showed you is a little bit of an exaggerated one. In reality, it is more flat. But if you want to look at the actual science, you can online. And the truth is that the IQ distribution of people with autism is actually less common around the median, like the average, and more commonly on the lower or higher end of the spectrum. To put it in layman's terms, people with autism are commonly below average intelligent or commonly above average intelligent compared to someone who doesn't have autism compared to neurotypical intelligence, right? Because intelligence, the way we measure it, it's based on an average, really. IQ is pretty much a model that assumes a certain average, and the average is 100 IQ. So when you take the whole world population, 100 IQ is the average IQ and the most commonly occurring IQ, I suppose. It's in the middle and what statistically most people have. But for people with autism, it's actually more likely for them to be below or above average. That's funny. So that means that if you are born with autism, you have a higher probability of being very below average intelligent or being very above average intelligent. To put it very, very bluntly, and I don't like using the word dumb, but statistically, people with autism are either likely to be much dumber or much smarter, and less likely to be in the middle of average intelligence. I don't like the word dumb. It leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. I don't want to call low-functioning people dumb. I think intelligence and the way we measure IQ is also flawed in many ways, but let's just use these jarring terms, because my native language is not English, so sometimes I use offensive words like dumb or retarded to say something, while there should be a more elegant way to say it. I'm very well spoken in English, but my vocabulary is so limited. Sometimes I have to resort to using very primitive words. And I don't want to say unintelligent either, it feels bad. But let's be really honest here. People with autism tend to be they tend to have a much lower IQ than the average person, or they tend to have a much higher IQ than the average person. So it means that they are more distributed towards the extreme ends of the spectrum. That's funny, and that's also very interesting. What's interesting is that my average IQ is actually almost perfectly 100. But there is something weird going on in my brain where some parts of my brain are highly developed and gifted. For example, my verbal IQ, I'm proud of it, is 127. That means verbally I'm very gifted. I'm very gifted with deductive reasoning. So you guess that part of me falls in the higher end of the IQ spectrum. But some parts of my brain, like spatial awareness, are around IQ 90. Which is more low functioning. So I'm really a combination of a person with autism who is very bad, very below average at a lot of things in life, but also above average at some peculiar things. I think that's just interesting. And I think the high functioning and low functioning thing that we often refer to, they are not clinical terms. But low functioning often refers to someone who needs constant help and constant supervision. And high functioning, it often refers to a person with autism who can function in society, although they may have minor issues. They can function, they can work, take care of themselves. And low functioning means someone else has to take care of them. And I understand why these terms exist now, even though they are not clinical, even though they are just both parts of one spectrum of variation. The fact that people with autism tend to be either very below average IQ or very above average IQ, but not around the middle. That makes like a certain dichotomy, I suppose, like a contrast, almost like a binary.
where it's more distributed towards, well, people who are very below average or above average, which this effect may be observed in society to a certain extent when you work with patients with autism, where you either notice a lot of above average intelligent people or below average intelligent people, which makes sense why people refer to it as high functioning or low functioning. Then again, the fact that it's a bell curve with a different distribution doesn't mean it's not a spectrum. It's not a binary, it's a spectrum. So people with autism can in fact have average intelligence. People with autism can have average functioning and average intelligence. Even though it's less likely for them to be around the average, it can still happen, right? Less likely is not the same as impossible. So there's still millions of people with autism who are just around the average intelligence. So even though they're less likely to be and more on the extreme ends, they can still be of average intelligence. So don't assume what we are capable of. But this is some interesting neurological information to think about, in my opinion.
To be continued in part 3. Before you draw any conclusions, make sure to watch all the parts of this series in a chronological order, or you may draw your conclusion too early. This is actually one very long video broken up into smaller parts to make it more digestible for viewers. Please make sure to watch part 2 and part 1 of this series first to understand the full scope of everything I am trying to say and the conclusion I am trying to reach. Yes, this series has a nice conclusion, a conclusion you should be able to reach only by watching all the parts of this series in a chronological order. So please don't start watching here in part 3 without having seen 1 and 2.